What's up, Ingonyamas? This is Phantology, Steven, Josh, and Ryan with an episode that we're really excited about, The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is one that we've been wanting to read for a long time. Honestly, don't know why it's taken so long. Just, I guess the life being hectic, etc., has moved things back. But we're finally getting to it, and just in time too, because the sequel comes out just next week. So to get this no spoiler discussion started, we're going to give a little backstory of the author and the book, do like a maybe brief summary of what you can expect, talk about why you should read, why you shouldn't read, etc. So a few different things here. So the author, Evan Winter, this guy is listed as Canadian, but he's actually born in England to South American parents and
South
grew
Africa.
up.
South African.
No, South
Oh,
American.
South American?
That's what it
Oh,
says on his listing.
my
Let me
bad.
just verify that. All right, so yeah, no, according to his website, born in England to South American parents, Evan Winter was raised in Africa near the historical territory of his ancestors. So, I mean, talk about an international presence here. Evan's been all over the place, and
So,
you can totally see that in the book.
so it says his parents are from South America, but his ancestors are from Africa.
Well, they move around. Your ancestors move around. Like I could have one set of ancestors that's from one place, and then they could move, right? I would
Okay.
assume that's what's going on here.
All right.
Yeah, I think as Americans we have a different perspective on lineage than a lot of people have because going pretty far back, most generations, like we're from um, at least us three, um,
Yeah.
our ancestors are from America, and so I think if you have like some ancestors from one country and some other ancestors from another country, then that can get a little bit more confusing or more diverse.
All right. I won't sidetrack us on this anymore.
But it's an important discussion to have because a huge part of the book is the fact that it's described as an African inspired fantasy. And that's who the characters are, that's what the setting is, that's what a lot of the fantasy vocabulary in the book is. That's how, I mean, down to the way that the dialogue is written, that's what it is. And I think that's something we need to talk about because it's a very important thing for fantasy to have this. We're getting away from just the typical European inspired fantasy. Now we have something that's literally African inspired. And how great is that we're going to have this, I mean, entire like opening up of another culture that we can get more into with fantasy.
Yeah, and I really, really like this book. For and that's just one of the reasons. Like getting to experience a new take on fantasy from a different cultural perspective was a really cool experience. But as I was reading it, it kind of just became the world, right? Like it kind
Yeah.
of
Yep.
became just you were living in this cool culture that was created. And when you step back, you can definitely see, from my limited, understanding of different African cultures, you can see that influence in it. But
Mm-hmm.
it just was a really fun and entertaining read, regardless of that, or in addition to that.
Yeah, I mean, almost similar to like when you're reading Stormlight Archive, you're like, well, this is in Roseshire. We got all these different cultures, and you're right into it. Same thing here. The only difference being that this one's much more inspired by real life cultures in Earth, right?
Now, did
Yeah.
you guys read the book, or did you listen to it on Audible?
I did both. And I know people on Discord have made fun of me for listening too much, but no, I listened to large portions, but then I would go back and read as well because I was pretty into it and I wanted to pick up on what was going on.
Yeah, I did. I listened to parts and read parts, and honestly, I felt listening to it and kind of enhances the experience because the um, the narrator of the book, he speaks the terms in, I mean, with kind of like an African pronunciation, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the politically correct way to say it, but it helped immerse me more in the culture. Like, whereas, there's lots of fantasy books that have words that can be hard to read or hard to understand, but I felt like having this book, this African fantasy book narrated by an African person, or I mean, somebody who at least has ancestry from Africa helped immerse me more in it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing that I struggled with was there's a lot of vocabulary words and names that I'm just not as familiar with because they were kind of along that line. And so I struggled to just pick up on, I guess, what was being said and then like get it all straight in my mind. So that's why I also wanted to go back and read too, because I mean, there's at least like 5 to 6 different pretty important words that all start with I that sound pretty similar. And so in order to solidify that, I wanted to read too.
Yeah.
So this book was self-published at first, actually, and then Orbit picked it up and signed Evan Winter onto a 4-book deal. Fires of Vengeance comes out next week, literally a week from today. So we're going to try to maybe read that and record before Rhythm of War, but we cannot promise that. Fantology was coming up with our schedule for the upcoming couple of months, and it's very busy, as you might expect. But we are very excited for Fires of Vengeance, and I think it's one that we plan on reading as soon as possible.
Yeah. And just going back to the self-published thing, it's like pretty amazing to me that this book didn't get picked up. I don't know how much shopping around Evan Winter did. I don't know if he even did shop it around or if he just self-published right away. But this was a standout first book from an author. Like, I would have thought that a publisher would have picked this thing up because it was really good.
Yeah, like you said, it's hard to know exactly what the extent of the self-publishing, what the extent of him looking around was before he went to self-publishing. And I know it can be quite difficult. So I guess maybe that's a little discouraging to think, like if you're going to want to try to find someone before you self-publish and he wasn't able to with this, but at the same time, he was able to get on with publishers. So that's great.
And he did try something pretty unique with this. And I know that that's sometimes hard to do with a lot of bigger publishers, but it was just done really well. And it was written really well, I thought.
Yeah.
So
I feel like in fantasy in general, we do kind of get a lot of similar things, but I also think that the industry has moving towards where publishers are probably a bit more open and accepting of different different takes on fantasy, rather than just your traditional European knights of the round table type thing with witches and wizards.
Yeah, we're for sure. I would be very surprised to see, the next big author come out with something that's like, yeah, European Knights of the Round Table. I don't think there's much of an appetite for that unless you have a new twist on it.
Mm-hmm.
well, that's something that Brandon Sanderson is kind of doing with the Stormlight Archive, is he kind of has the Knights Radiant as, being literal knights. And
Right, but it's not European. It's this agglomeration
but
of all these different cultures.
Kind of, but it is, I think, still stemming from a European influenced fantasy, with there being knights and it being kind of like there's royalty and there's a caste system. And I know that this has some of that too, but I think that it is more influenced from European style fantasy than a book like this is.
At the same time, Evan Winter is obviously pretty influenced by a lot of the same things. In his bio, I mean, he talks about reading Wheel of Time and other things when he was growing up. So I don't think we're saying that this is a complete departure from what you've read before. There's a lot of books that you're going to think it's similar to. So let's talk about that. What if I gave you guys like one series or one book that you had to say, if you like this book, then you also like Rage of Dragons, what would that series be? Or what would be similar to Rage of Dragons, at least?
I feel like you're fishing for an answer here, and I'm going to say what I think you're fishing for, which is
All
Red
right.
Rising.
I think Red Rising is a great comparison. So without saying any spoilers for either series, why would you think that's the case?
Well, it's similar in that you have this caste system set up, and the main character rises from one of the lower castes, and his story is very much driven by vengeance.
They're also super fast paced and action packed. and you follow one character through the whole time. It's kind of a blow by blow type of thing. Sometimes Red Rising maybe more so because of the choppy way that it's written is trying to get that effect. But yeah, I mean, Red Rising is the sci-fi version. Rage of Dragons is almost the fantasy version to some extent. I thought they were very similar.
Mm-hmm.
I did not love Red Rising, but I really like this one. So I know that everyone's sick of my hot take from Red Rising. So I just hesitate to compare. It's that, but I don't know. I think that if you've read if you like fantasy, if you know you like fantasy, I think you're gonna like this book, including like maybe if you've read Mistborn. I think that this is not super similar to Mistborn, but I think it has a lot of the same elements of fast-paced,
Yeah.
a lot of really well-written action, a younger protagonist that isn't entirely relatable to a lot of people, but is really well written. So
Look for my hot take on what Josh just said in the spoiler episode coming up after this one. I think another good comparison would be I like the Mistborn comparison in terms of kind of like general fantasy. I think another good one would be Name of the Wind because of the way that it starts. You have your protagonist who's a little bit of a Mary Sue, let's be honest, in both. And you follow them in a really zoomed in lens, and they have a hard time for the majority of the book. Name of the Wind is very different in terms of the quality of the prose and just like the focus that's put on making the prose what it is. I think this one is much more accessible and fast paced. But in terms of characters and just like generally what's going on, I think those two series are pretty similar.
I think that this is a little bit grittier than something like Name of the Wind. Um, like, and I don't
Yeah,
think
I
it
don't know. I
really,
mean, Quoth has a hard time out of it for most of the book.
yeah, but just the overall feeling of Name of the Wind is kind of,
Yeah,
I don't know.
maybe a little more
This
lighthearted.
this doesn't quite delve into being grimdark, I don't think, but it
Yeah,
is pretty gritty feeling, if that makes sense.
there are a few moments from this book where I was like, "Whoa, what the heck? That just came out of nowhere."
Yeah.
Maybe check out the spoiler episode for that. There's one line in particular that I was like, okay, interesting.
All right.
So, as we close this non spoiler episode, Josh and Ryan, well, maybe one of you take this, maybe one of you take one side, one of you take the other side. So, why should you read this book? Is the question. And then on the flip side, why should you not read this book? Like, why would you pass and read something else? Ryan, I know you loved this one, so maybe we'll give you the why should you read. And Josh, give us some reason, like maybe why you should pass.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think this is a very interesting departure from, your typical European fantasy. There are a lot of traditional fantasy elements in it. There's a magic system. Um, I mean, you have this character fighting against crazy odds. I guess it's not limited to fantasy itself. But Evan Winter adds a lot of really interesting elements in through his use of African terms. Are these terms actually derived from real African culture, or are they kind of like made up with like to sound African?
I don't know. That'd be a good question. Like stuff like Inco Kelly, like that kind of sounds like it totally could be some
Yeah.
historical word for like leader of a war band or something like that. But I don't know. I would love to know.
All right. Well, getting back to why you should read it. So you'll kind of be immersed in a totally different world than you might be used to, and this world is, I feel like, very fascinating. The action is fascinating. It really kept me moving forward, just wanting to know what was going to come next. And I I think that I I think that the characters are kind of fun, and it's just a book that's hard to put down. So it'll keep you reading from the beginning. Well, maybe from the I think about maybe 30% until the end. You'll read pretty quickly.
Which is your experience, right? Didn't you stay up all night reading this?
Yeah. So the last, I don't know, half of the book, maybe a little bit more, I read until like 7 a.m. Yeah. So I can't remember the last time I stayed up that late reading a book.
Yeah, so there's an endorsement right there. Okay, Josh.
Oh,
We don't want to be
so
too negative, but like give us a reason why maybe like it might not be for everyone.
So real quick, I looked up Inco Kelly, and it looks like it is like an old term for leader, and that's according to Wikipedia. So maybe
Nailed
it
it.
was just referencing that book, but I don't think so. It looks like it's a legit term. So a big reason why you might not want to read this book is because it is just a first book in what is going to be a 4-book series, and Evan Winter um, has a standout debut performance, but he hasn't really been tested with sequels or with how well he's going to run a series.
Yes. Yep.
And so there's always the chance that you might want to wait until the whole series is done if you're one of those people that just will only read it if the series is done, or you might just want to wait to see if the quality stays high. So if you're one of those people that like can't stand that the third Name of the Wind book is not out yet, then maybe you might want to wait until.
Yep. Josh has invoked the Rothfuss clause on us.
This also reminds me of something else, though. Remember how good Bloodsong was? And I feel like Tower Lord was still good, but it wasn't quite as good. And then
Yeah.
Dang, very similar.
Dang, was that also from Orbit picking up a self-published author?
I think that was Penguin, actually.
Hopefully. Well, fact check me there. Yeah, I'm not sure what it was, but yeah, we could have a similar situation. That would be tragic.
So yeah, that's kind of a reason why I don't say never read this book, but you might want to wait to read this book until there's a little bit more established things going on. So
okay, so to close our non-spoiler, give us a rating out of 10 for the book. Ryan, what'd you think?
I would give it a 9 out of 10. Actually, let's go with 9.25.
9.25.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, make sure you're accurate down to that quarter.
If we're going quarter points, then I'm going 7.75.
All right, quarter points allowed for this episode, not in the future.
So I would round up to 8. So I would say 7.75 if we're going quarter points, round it up to 8 if we're not.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7.5. And if you want to hear my full reasoning on why I liked it, but it wasn't my favorite book ever, I'm a little bit lower than it sounds like most other people that have read the book. I mean, I did like it quite a bit, but there were some things that weren't quite my favorite. So I'll talk about why Tao is the antagonist of the entire book, and it drove me crazy. But check that out in our next episode, which is going to be full spoilers. So thanks for listening, and Phantology will see you guys next time.